At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be episode 399 of Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. As always, a big shout out to patrons as well as our sponsors in Digital and Rapid Deploy. I just wanted to jump in here really quick. The episode that you're about to hear is an Imagine Listening session that occurred just a couple of weeks ago now at the 2021 NENA conference in Columbus, Ohio. Just thank you to NENA for everything, for hosting the podcast. Was able to record several episodes there, and especially this one here with Imagine Listening and Open Mic. Thank you all for coming out and in support of each other and for sharing your I Am 911 stories. It was a packed room, and as always, the stories are powerful, and it just meant so much to be in there with all of you. So thank you for being there, again, for being there for each other and support, and for the job that you do. It's not an easy one, and not many people can do it. So thank you for being the most vital piece of public safety and for contributing your stories to the I Am 911 movement. There were some stories that were submitted, and I want to read those here before we get into the audio of the rest of this episode. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the stories that were submitted here during that session. You called, crying, because you found your son dead, stabbed to death. I took the address and dispatched police and EMS. It sounded familiar, not sure why. I got your son's name after the fact. I recognized the address because I had recently registered him as a sex offender. You lost your son, and for that, I am sorry. But I am conflicted. I have kids, and he is gone and cannot hurt other families. Am I broken? I am 911. The call started with screams of, "They're dead. They're all dead." I asked, "Who? Where?" He screams, "My brother, his wife, the dog, even the goddamn bird." "Where are you?" He gave the address, asked more questions, and found out they're all in the dining room. They were having dinner, where they all died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Followed up with the fire department. They stated it looked like a wax museum. I am 911. I've been dispatching for 10 years, and this call that I took about a month ago is stuck in my head, and I just can't figure out why. I think it's that nothing can change what happened. The call itself wasn't bad. The caller was great, calm, answered all my questions. He was out of state and received an iPad call from his 6-year-old grandson who said, "I just heard shots, and I think mom is dead." My officers responded and found a murder-suicide with 2 kids present. Essentially, I just have this profound guilt of the shit river I started for all the officers that responded, to see their pain in handling the call is unbearable. I am 911. I very recently answered a 911 call from a woman who told me her husband was not breathing. She had just come home and found him. She very quickly began screaming and would not answer questions or respond to me. She would just scream. I was only able to get the address, that it was her husband, and that he was 32. I am 31. I will never forget her screams, and I'm struggling trying to get over the feelings that there was something I could have or should have done. I was able to learn from the fire department that he had been dead for a while, and no level of instruction from me could have saved him. But my caller was so upset, and I keep thinking I should have been able to help her. Instead, I just listened to her scream and try to do CPR on her dead husband, who was my age. I am 911. I received a 911 call from an elderly female at 3 a.m. who woke up in the middle of the night and found her husband of 50 plus years, her soulmate, not breathing. With her being elderly, she was not able to perform CPR. She asked me if she could call her daughter and keep me on the phone. She is sobbing. I say yes. That is fine, as I didn't want to leave her alone. I could hear her tell her daughter, "Honey, Dad's dead. He's gone." She was crying. It was a long few minutes on the phone, waiting for the medics and ambulance to get there. I am 911. I received a call for a welfare check The son was concerned about his dad as they got into a fight. So as I got a deputy headed that way, the deputy I sent was only at our department for 6 months. As the deputy got on scene, he informed me no one was answering the door. At that time, I got a 911 call. Just as I say, 911, what's the address of your emergency? I hear a deputy scream, shots fired, in a winded, loud pitch voice. As I am still on 911, I have an elderly male tell me he has a gun and someone was trying to break in. As my partner and I are handling these two calls, I get the address of my caller. It was the same address where my deputy was at. I proceeded to tell this male on the phone to put the gun down. It was our deputy outside. In the end, our deputy was able to detain this subject. The male thought someone was trying to break in. Everyone was safe. I am 911. Again, these are just a few stories that were actually written down and submitted during Imagine Listening at the NENA conference in Columbus, Ohio. What you're about to hear is the audio from the rest of the session of Imagine Listening. And again, thank you all for sharing your stories. And without further ado, here's Imagine Listening.
Imagine waking up after a good night's rest. The sun is shining, and you're getting ready for the day. Things seem a bit quiet, though, so you check the rooms. Now imagine you're 911, taking a call from a mom who found her infant not breathing. You start CPR and have the ambulance heading out. Just as they arrive, you hear the child cry, and all is well. This is what it's like within the trenches. In this episode, you'll hear stories from the I Am 911 movement, a movement I started to fight the reclassification of dispatchers from clerical to protective and bring awareness to the types of calls that 911 dispatchers answer on a daily basis. This is an Imagine Listening session, and we are here together and in person at the 2021 NENA conference. Now, you heard the warning at the beginning, but I must warn you again and add that if you suffer from PTSD or have suicidal tendencies, you are listening at your own risk. The stories you're about to hear are all true and come from the dispatchers who lived them. While some stories have a good outcome, the majority are horrifying. This is our reality. Your worst day is our everyday. So let's start with a bang. I want you to imagine each story. Become the dispatcher who has taken each call, and imagine listening.
So I actually have what's called the 4x4. So I've been dispatched. So there's a lot that I've dealt with, but one of the biggest ones that stuck with me after I started dispatching was it was 18. Everything. Tell me everything. Let's talk about this. And she makes the comment to me, "Oh, Mom, everything happened to her. She thought she'd be better." So I'm brand new. I said, "Let me get your mom on the phone. Let's talk it through with your mom." And she said, "She's the reason I'm dead." 2 years in, I always played it back of what could I do different? There's nothing I could have done different. She was going to do it no matter what. And she had it in her mind at that time that she was going to end her life. So it didn't matter at that time.
And we're a very small agency, and it's a small town. And so a woman I grew up with and had hung out with in high school, she was much older, had an 11-year-old kid. And she told me she had locked herself in the closet because her kid had a bat and was going to beat her to death. And she was telling me that he had mental problems. And not only did it, it had the impact of being a dispatcher and getting her help and protecting my officers from an 11-year-old child, which was very confusing to me. That this child would be in that kind of state of mind that he would be willing to beat his mom. So I wanted to keep her safe, and in a closet, you can't lock the door. And I was just very frightened. I was frightened for her and frightened for me that I might have to hear something to someone that I know and to something I don't comprehend. And it turned out okay. They were able to get there and help her. But it was something that really did impact me, that things that, we get trained and everything, but it was something in the moment that was just something I would have never expected.
She made me think of a call that I took a few months ago. Answered the phone, heard a male voice, gave us an address. It was not a correct address. And so it doesn't populate. And you just had that feeling. So, keep rebidding. It's just not circling down. And all of a sudden he said, I need to report a suicide. And it was so odd because there was no emotion. It was so flat. And so I said, when did this happen? Because the way he said it just was odd. I didn't think that he had found a family member or anything like that, or a friend. And as I was getting that out, he said, and I'm the victim. And about 2 seconds later, I heard a slamming noise, which listening back, I know that was definitely the gunshot then. But at the moment, I thought he'd kicked a chair or something out from underneath him because it did not sound like a gunshot. And you could hear him writhing around on the phone. And, we're just trying to get the guys there and EMS and everybody to the right house. And eventually, he had locked and kind of barricaded the doors from my understanding because his dad couldn't get in the house. So we could hear the dad banging on the door. So we told them go to the house where the gentleman's outside banging on the door. And unfortunately, he was life flighted. He didn't make it. He was the grandson of a neighboring agency's sergeant, and he was only 12 years old. But his voice sounded so much more mature on the phone in the beginning. So I was floored when I found out that he was only 12 years old. I don't have kids of my own, but in our debriefing, everyone just went over, check in with your kids, check in with, your friends' kids, nieces, nephews. Just, it's a really big problem right now, and just check on them. But thank you.
I've been working in dispatch for, 6 years now. I'm already getting emotional. So this was about a year into dispatching. I was involved in my first officer-involved shooting. And I didn't know it at the time. So at first we were just getting phone calls, and they were like, we just heard a whole bunch of shots, in this area. And really suburban area. So I was just like, okay, it's probably fireworks. Okay, whatever. But then by the time we got our 5th call, I was like, all right, something's up. And I remember talking to someone, the lady's describing this car just sitting in the middle of the road. And she's like, it's a van. It's a dark colored van. And I'm like, good Lord, a van? Like, are there kids involved? Like, what the heck is going on? And my partner took a call from an officer who lives in the area, and he said that he was going out there to check to see what was going on. So we knew it was something serious when an officer's calling in saying that he heard shots. And he was off duty, so it's not like he was in uniform at all. And then we got another call from that officer's wife who was saying that her husband went out there. So once everything calmed down, I remember the first arriving officer, immediately, like the voice was just off. He was like, we need medics right away. Start fire, start EMS, start everybody this way. And so we start our units that way, still not knowing what's going on. And maybe felt like forever. The lieutenant or the sergeant at the time finally called in and told us who it was. And I was the one he talked to. And it took me about a minute and a half to say anything to anybody in the room because I was like, this is about to shatter everybody right now. And so I just said his number. I just said it was, oh God, what was his number at the time? Like 845 or something like that. And I was like, it was Justin. And I just remember just this dark cloud just entered the room. And everybody that was working the floor got moved out because we had replacement dispatchers come in and take over for us. And I remember replaying that conversation with the sergeant and feeling so bad because I sounded so cold when I talked to him. I had no compassion in my voice. And I remember just, oh, okay, I'll let everybody know. All right, thanks, bye. And we went to a debriefing like a couple of weeks later about it. And I remember sharing with the officers and apologizing to them because I usually pray before I get to work. And that day I decided not to pray. And I've always had this guilt that maybe if I would have said a little prayer like I usually do, then maybe he still would have been with us. So.
This is good. We're sharing these stories. For a long time, it was almost as if we weren't allowed to feel. We were always pushed off to the side. And, it's a new day, isn't it? This is good. This is part of the healing process to be able to share a story, something that we've had buried. I was one of those dispatchers that buried my calls. I thought I was leaving it at work. Boy, was my ass wrong, because in silence, disconnection at home, that shit wasn't staying at work. So I started sharing. And it was a lot easier.
Call takers and dispatchers for police, fire, EMS. Was working our county console one day, and we had a pursuit that came in for a neighboring agency and started our deputies there. Working on calling this pursuit, and we get a 911 call that comes in that I happen to also take. It is the suspect who is being pursued by our officers. He informs me that he has multiple firearms inside of the vehicle, and he is going to kill all of our officers going, as well as himself. I thankfully was in a room full of amazing coworkers who took over the pursuit for me, who were working tirelessly to get every bit of information we could on this guy so I could try to relate to him, try to convince him to change his actions. Continued to be pursued, so I hear our sirens from our officers in the background. He's continuing to tell me that he is going to kill them and kill himself. I hear officers start screaming on the radio and shots fired coming across my phone. And at the time, we have to think that we are not there. We do not see what is happening. We do not have any bit of information until someone wants to follow up with us. And it's the positive that came from this is he had no firearms in his vehicle. And it was the sound of the officers' gunshots. And everybody walked away from that incident. But it's a reminder for the whole, for our officers responding, and thankful to them that they did follow up with us and let us know what was going on, because I hung up that call not knowing if our guys were down, not knowing if, what it was, but seeing it as the dispatcher side, the call taker side together was a lot at the time.
When I was extremely new, I took a call from a wired line, so everything populated immediately, and all I could hear was screaming, like blood-curdling screams. There was a father who eventually came to the phone and answered some very vague questions, trying to get more information about what happened. Eventually, he did tell me that his daughter his 2-year-old daughter was playing in the driveway, and he, while intoxicated, was backing the car down the driveway and drove over his child. he said that he wasn't willing to wait for an ambulance and all I could hear was this child screaming like it was in the phone with me. And then the phone goes dead because it's his landline phone and he was driving away going to the hospital. So I'm panicked and calling all my hospitals thinking, I don't know where he's going to go. I'm just trying to get them prepared of what may happen and what he may bring in. They weren't going to give me any information after the fact. I told the officers, I'm like, I need you to tell me that everything's okay. I need you to just say everything's okay, because I don't know that I can deal with whatever happened. I still don't know how that child is. I have been told the child was okay, and was in surgery. Again, there were some serious screams, and 2 years old versus a vehicle. I don't know how that could have even worked, but I'm not willing to go back and try to find more information.
So I have two that come to mind, but I'll be really quick. And I remember starting 9 years ago, and I wasn't 90 days in yet, and my father passed away unexpectedly. And so I had very limited time of what I could take off to have some bereavement. And so I go back to work prematurely, and I'm taking calls, and I'm talking to this guy that's having like domestic trouble. And he says, I don't know why I'm saying this to you, but I'm so sorry for your loss. And I lost it. Like, I just wasn't expecting it, but it was a reminder that, take care of myself. That's what it was to me. And also the other call was, I was on the radio and there was a 12-year-old male involved in a domestic at his house, and he jumps in the police cruiser and takes off. And he's driving like 90 miles an hour. And of course we have AVO, we can see where he's going, but he's inside the car with all these weapons, and he goes to his school. So I'm coaching him over the radio, like, hey, just pull over the cruiser. Let's get you some help. And he's like, I'm tired of living. I'm tired of going through this. Long story short, they were able to get him to pull over. He did hit a police cruiser, but everybody was okay. And they were able to get him some help.
I've been dispatching for 17 years now. A couple of years ago, now I'm a supervisor. I don't handle as many phone calls. But of course, we were shorthanded, so I jumped in. I was answering phone calls. I take a call from in our area, and it's a female on the phone, and she's describing she had gotten into a domestic at her home, and her husband had tried to choke her, and then they kind of escalated from there, and then held a knife to her neck. And I honestly, I don't remember how she said she got away with it, got away from him. But, I get my people there, and I leave the room. I had the exact same situation in my own household about a year prior to that. And so I was still in the depth of dealing with stuff, but it's one of those things where I started a long time ago as a victim advocate, became a dispatcher, and now it's like you want to jump over and you're like, it'll be okay. You can make it through it, but that's not the role I'm in at that point. But yeah, that was a hard one.
I answered I could hear were blood curdling screams, and this 12-year-old girl was just sobbing, and in between her sobs, I could understand that she and her 11-year-old brother had a fight, as young kids do, and a few hours earlier, and she said that she told him she wished he was dead. And she couldn't find him, and it was dark, and her mother was at the store and called her and asked her where her brother was. She said she didn't know. She went looking for him, and she found him hanging in a tree in their backyard. And she kept saying, I just want to tell him I'm sorry. Can you just help me wake him up? And those screams, I'll never forget those screams. That's been 23 years ago. And I'll never forget those screams. I often wonder how she is. I am 911.
And my partner took a call from an elderly lady who was just sobbing. And she just kept telling us over and over again that her grandson had been shot. And she told us that he was at a cabin hunting. There was no address. It was out in the woods. They flew there in a plane. And she was able to give us a phone number for her husband who was with the grandson. So I was able to call the husband. We had no idea at this time anything about the patient. She just couldn't calm down to tell us anything. So when I got her husband on the phone, he was very calm. Could tell he was in shock. And so I asked him, how old is the patient? And he said he's 12. And I could hear a child in the background crying. And I assumed that was the patient. And he said that the grandfather said that he'd been out at the neighbors getting something. And when he came back, he found his 12-year-old grandson had been shot by his 12-year-old brother. They were twins. And they were hours and hours away from help. It would take a helicopter to get out there to them. And it was a very long time on the phone with this family. And of course, at some point, the grandfather lost it and started going off on the 12-year-old that was alive. And so I gave the grandfather some jobs to do, and I asked him to put the other 12-year-old on the phone with me. And I spent the next 45 minutes just talking to this child and trying to redirect him and get his mind off of what had happened. And I'll never forget that conversation with that child and the way he felt and his emotions. And he just kept saying over and over again, he was my best friend. He was my best friend. That's my brother. And that was a long call.
About 6 weeks ago, I think it was, I answered the phone and the guy said, I picked this kid up for work and he's in my car and he's not breathing. And I, okay. So they're like driving on the highway. So I'm like, okay, where can you pull over? So he told me, I said, okay, pull over. Thankfully, the guy did everything I asked. He pulled over, he got the kid out of the car, he started CPR. The emergency people came. Okay. About 2 days later, I get a text from a coworker and she says, that CPR that you took the other day? That was my son. So thankfully the guy survived, but that was really when I think this job became, you're helping people
Shortly into my career, I think it's like a year or two in, took a call from suicidal male. Could tell he had a gun. He was serious. It was the last person he was going to talk to. And I stayed on the phone with him, talked to him, what's going on? Is there somebody? Tell me, why are you here? This goes on. I can hear him set. I'm like, okay, that's good. Good first step. Still alive, which is great. So I can credit it's, wow, I'm actually making an impact here and saving lives. And then not some time after that, I got a call from an elderly woman. And she tells she was frail in her 80s. She had found her husband not breathing. Walked her through CPR. Like, ma'am, I'm here with you, encouraging her. Everything we're trained to do, counting with them. You're not alone. I'm here with you. Keep going. You're doing great. Work, and there's something waiting for me. It's a thank you card from her. Thank you so much for all of your help, which is partly why I do. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this job. Celebrate we get many of them in this job.
Again, this is a good thing. Being here together, it's hard to explain sometimes what it is like to be in a room with a bunch of people who know exactly what it is like to take a phone call, to hear those screams, to happen to see something on TV or hear a certain sound that is a trigger. But it's also awesome that we're all here to be able to do this together and feel okay to do it and to share these stories. It's the first step, as I said. Once you share that story now, it's about the self-care. Like, what are you doing to continue to be able to take care of yourself? And also to help others who, when they've had a hard call and you ask them, are you okay? And they say no. Kind of read them a bit. I was that person too. After all these calls, are you okay? Yeah, of course I'm okay. But no, I wasn't all right. But I didn't want to say it because I didn't want to be the person who looked weak, right? Well, that's bullshit. There's more courage there to be able to ask for help. So please do. A round of applause for everyone who has shared a story.
I want to thank everyone once again for not only coming to the booth to record episodes, to say hello, especially to say hello to my special guests, the 911 Wonder Women, an amazing nonprofit organization, but also for attending the Imagine Listening session for both parts. Imagine Listening, emotionally intense, powerful stories, and Open Mic Live, which will be the next episode that is coming next week. It'll be an epic episode 400. So stay tuned for that one. But again, thank you to those who wrote stories, those who shared out loud, and for those who were in there just in support. Even if you didn't share a story, thank you for being there. For everyone involved, because that's what this is all about. That's why we share these stories, so that we can heal and find some sort of comfort and closure together. Thank you again. For those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that'll be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/withinthetrenchespodcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy. And again, as always, a big shout out to patrons. If you're looking for any bonus content and want to become a patron yourself, you can check us out, and that'll be patreon.com/WTTpodcast. This episode can be seen on Facebook, Twitter, as well as YouTube, and it can be heard 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.